Hello, friends, and welcome again. This is Sean O'Neill with the rest of the Westheimer String Quartet. We're here for part 2 of our conversation on mindful practice. So, I thought we would start off and just reflect on our conversation from last week for a minute, or perhaps the week since then. And I was just curious if that conversation, anything from that conversation, has appeared particularly relevant for you all this week, if it's something that has come across your mind at all, if perspectives that other people brought up reminded you of things that you hadn't thought about in a while that came back as relevant for you this week.
I will say I think that this week that I have tried, I have kind of a slowly growing pile of things that I need to practice, and I find that sometimes that can get a little overwhelming. And so I have tried this week to just spend some time with all of the things that I'm working on, the recording for this and a couple of other projects and
Mm-hmm.
all-state etudes for a workshop that I'm doing on Monday. Playing a little bit and kind of paying attention to what's going on, but not really stressing myself out about having to get things a certain way, and just kind of recognizing where my hands are this week, I think, more than anything else.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, one thing I'd like to, over the course of the conversation today, is sort of zoom the camera lens back a little bit from where we ended it last week and maybe talk about this practice that perhaps can be cultivated while practicing an instrument, but is relevant in virtually any context that we
Mm-hmm.
find ourselves in.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll definitely come back to that. Thank you, Daron.
I've been in a better place musically and technically. I will say it's 100% because of the conversation we had last week. As a result of quarantine, I was reevaluating, my own personal burnout and technique things, and talking about being mindful of the right things or the things I want to be mindful of while performing. I've definitely had a much more productive musical week working on various things.
Nice.
Mm, excellent. Alexa, I know your life is very different from ours right now.
I just had some thoughts about recording music and
Mm-hmm.
how one goes about that, and how in a recording it's kind of a permanent capture of that moment in time and how things happened in that rendition of, if you're recording a piece of music.
Mm-hmm.
Little things like, oh, do I keep that mistake? Do I re-record to try to get rid of it? Things like that. Is it an expression of humanity to keep it in? Is it, do I need to fix it? Quotes around fix, or is it something that's not a mistake, but a realistic representation of the piece still? And just things like that.
I definitely found myself in pursuit of perfection while recording, getting in my own way. Perfection being the enemy of a good product, or the pursuit of perfection, or the belief that perfection is even possible, getting in the way of the process itself.
Isn't it interesting how when you're the person recording, you have a lot of that baggage, or you can call it that awareness of the take or whatever, wrapped up in that recording, but none of that actually goes onto the tape, right? It's only the thing that you actually make.
Mm-hmm.
But when you listen to it, you have this really strong feeling or association with how it went. But if you listen back to recordings of great players from a long time past, none of that actually translates, and we have to kind of recreate
Mm-hmm.
our own meaning out of the actual thing that went onto the recording.
What do you mean? Like, none of that actually translates? What is
Your
that?
feelings about a passage, whether it went well or didn't go well, aren't in the recording. The passage going well or not going well is in the recording, but your feelings about it, and that's not to say that maybe they don't manifest as more tension or a bigger sound or something in some other way, but there is not like an actual capture of the emotion itself that you're feeling.
Yeah, so does that make a difference when you're listening to someone else's recording? Do you think about how they were feeling?
Right, that's exactly my question,
Or
right?
do you think you noticed or could perceive that?
Right, it kind of creates this space where you don't have to, but you can kind of paint your own narrative on top of it. Like, I know that there are recordings of Emmanuel Foreman where it's like he showed up at the studio, he just played it down one time, and then he went home. Like, what was he feeling when he did that? Nobody knows, and he might have just been like, I gotta go record some cello and then go home and hang out with my wife. I don't know. To me, there's something interesting about that sort of in between space.
Yeah, I guess I would also add to that I personally do believe that with experience comes some level of perception.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think I necessarily have the experience to tell if someone like Heifetz or, one of the greats I wouldn't be able to tell what they were feeling. But I did have to listen to a few of my students doing their regional auditions just to verify, as their director. So I had to make sure it was them playing. The level of experience I have compared to what they have allows me to perhaps understand a little bit of what they might have been feeling while they were playing, just based on what I could hear and having kind of trodden that path before, which I think is helpful to us as teachers. If we listen to our students, whether live or in a recording, I think we have that insight. But it's interesting to kind of put ourselves on the spectrum of, okay, I'm not going to be able to hear it and Heifetz is playing because he's, beyond my experience level, but I can hear it in my high school violinists playing and perhaps make some guesses as to what they were experiencing and why certain things happened.
So how do you typically try to respond? Say you listen to a recording or a student plays for you in person, and you sense there's some kind of internal negativity or stress or fear or maybe comparing themselves to others or whatever. How would you try to help that student?
Yeah, well, I am really big on kind of preempting that in a way and kind of setting up a healthy philosophy of music and playing music before that point happens. I think some anxiety during a recording is a little bit inevitable. I don't want to say that if you don't have it, that's bad, or if you don't need it per se, but I think it's likely. So I'm not going to expect that it's not going to be there, but before the audition.
Do you ever talk about like the framing of the anxiety as just something that you can feel in your body so that you can kind of reinterpret it in your mind? Is that something that you ever talk about or think about yourself?
I think that's a step ahead of. So the first thing I do, I'll start at my beginning and then maybe I'll get there. But the first thing I do is I tell them before the audition, hey, you've done the work up to this point. Now your only job is to represent yourself fairly. If that means you play some things out of tune, so be it. You're not going to suddenly become a, world-renowned violist today. As much as you might want to sound like whoever, you're not going to do that today. You're going to sound like you. And if you sound like you, great. If you sound like you on a bad day, maybe re-record. That's kind of the framework I try to set up. Like, yes, you absolutely can, redo it and get a better rendition, but you're not going to not be you. And if you right now on your journey is not good enough to make it in compared to the other recordings, so be it too. But that's not what it's about, really. It's about you representing the work you have done. And that's what it always is about in performance and in auditions, in anything where you're judged. It doesn't matter. You can be happy if you've done the work and you fairly represent yourself. So that's the setup. And then, to honestly answer your question, no, I don't spend a lot of time talking about the emotion itself and the anxiety and like what to do in the moment. I could probably work on that more and do a little bit of that more. I've done it a little bit for my own playing, and especially in relation to orchestral auditions, just because I've done a lot of them at this point. And so there's been a lot of times that I've got to experience the in the moment, roller coaster there and notice things and maybe decide that a plan is useful and as opposed to not having a plan and just going in being like, okay. Yeah. So I feel like I could definitely build that into teaching philosophies as well. I don't know if anybody else has methods that they use to coach people on in the moment anxiety or how to manage it or for themselves.
Or perhaps we could take a step back and talk about it in our own experience first, and then maybe how that influences how we approach it with our students or what other tools we have that we're using. So I think for me, at least, one thing that's very relevant in terms of talking when we're talking about anxiety or stress is like what kind of contexts I'm more likely to feel it in, and to just notice that first and then to start kind of working backward from there. For myself, at least, there are certain situations that I'm much more likely to be more critical of myself. Recording myself is definitely one of those places, and preparing for and taking auditions. It's not a 100% of the time situation, and that's partly what brought me, I think, initially to mindful practice was the realization that some contexts I was really happy about my playing and I felt really comfortable and everything was just kind of happening. And in other contexts, it very much was not that way. And it felt really uncomfortable and maybe more fear-based or anxiety-based practice motivations. Have you guys had similar experiences? Are there particular contexts or types of thought that you can fall into in those particular contexts? Or is it less is the context less relevant for you all? Is it more of a universal, like does it stay more or less consistent?
I deal with anxiety a lot in any sort of public performance setting. You know, it's one of the things I think that I am supposed to learn about by being a musician is how to deal with playing my instrument in front of other people. And I think that the root of the stress, without turning this into a therapy session or anything, I think that there's some element of projection from me because I know that, at least when I was younger, I kind of developed this sense that I would judge a person kind of wholly as a person based on how they played. You were not as good of a person if you did not play well. And so that translated into this fear and anxiety of my own, which is that other people are doing that when they hear me play. And if I don't represent myself perfectly, then the only thing that they can come away thinking is that guy doesn't know how to play the cello and that guy doesn't know anything and he's a loser.
So Daron, I'm very curious about this. So is this something that you can feel like when you're practicing leading up to a performance, or is it something that you get in front of the room and all of a sudden it's there?
It's absolutely just in the room with the people.
Really? So you don't experience that in the practice room leading up to it at all, really?
No.
Okay.
It is absolutely day and night practice room to stage.
Yeah, so it occurs to me that that would make it a very difficult thing to practice. If it's only happening when you're in front of other people and not in the practice room at all, it's not something that you can kind of work up towards, so to speak.
Yeah, I totally identify with that.
So what, if you don't mind
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, if you don't mind my asking, what kind of coping strategies have you developed over the years for the performance related aspect?
You know, I think that some of it is not like about the actual cello playing, but because knowing that it's kind of rooted in this kind of deeper psychological place, I think a lot of the ways that I think about it or that I try and work on it happen not necessarily with my cello, but it will be things like watching YouTube videos and just trying to find things that I like about a performance and not judge it for its negative qualities. To find things that I know are like objectively bad and still look for things to enjoy in them.
So is this something you still experience?
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%.
And I'm curious, is it only with music, or do you look at people and, oh, you're dressed like a loser, you must be a loser. Oh, you're overweight, you must, have this problem, or...
It is not only confined to music. I think it's worse with music, probably because I'm so invested in it and I feel like I have some measure of experience or authority where I can judge people. I don't know if it was which came first, the chicken or the egg, so to speak. I don't know if this larger character failing that I have bled into my musicianship or if this thing I developed as a musician bled out into the rest of my life. But it is definitely... it's something that I know about myself and that I'm working on.
Is being mindful of it in this context helpful for you in a larger, broader sense in terms of, well, in any way that you can think of?
I hope so. I don't know. I think that one of the key lessons, right, is that mindfulness teaches you that by noticing something and being aware of it, that you can change your response to it. And that's the whole thing. It doesn't mean that you have to be perfect or get it right or even notice every time that it happens, but being able to recognize that something is happening is the first step to being able to prevent it from happening, or if it's something that you do want more of, to foster that. I know that lots of people don't like to talk about it. I will take beta blockers for performances sometimes because the particular setting is extra stressful or I don't feel like I've had time to do the prep work or something.
I remember when you first started that, Daron, and it made a big difference if I remember.
They're absolutely incredible. They make all the difference for me, but I also recognize that in some sense that really great performance comes with that little, like, the edge that you get from anxiety. And I don't really know how to ride that line.
That's what I was alluding to a while ago with students, is almost a reframing of the anxiety. Just accepting that there's nothing really that you can do to get rid of it in a performance moment. But what you can do is just accept that it's, the word that I would just use is excitement, right?
Yeah.
Versus debilitating nerves, I guess.
There's a difference between the direction of an emotion and the magnitude of the emotion. And excitement and anxiety are both high magnitude emotions. It's just about where on the spectrum you are kind of pointing that energy.
Just for the record, I also use beta blockers, but only for orchestral auditions.
Mm. Yeah, so speaking of environments and specific ones, if you only use beta blockers for auditions, I assume that that's a bit more of a high stress environment for you.
So it's more high stress, and also I feel like the priorities of most audition panels, in my experience, go in line with what I might lose by taking beta blockers. Like, that doesn't matter as much.
Mm.
It's more important that I preserve what I do have, and not risk the anxiety levels.
Yeah, the priorities are almost different than a live performance in front of 100 people or whatever.
Right. I feel like losing the element of risk and spontaneity and humanness is actually maybe a positive thing for auditions. So all the negatives of the beta blockers, just, in my opinion and experience, are not negatives in that one particular scenario for me personally.
I know that for me, they do not prevent me from having to do other mindfulness work, right? They're not a magic bullet. They don't make me sound better. They just allow me to do the thing that I know how to do. And that in and of itself kind of allows a certain kind of confidence, which I really like. But that has to be part of a much larger mindfulness workout regimen, so to speak. And they don't put you in the right mindset. They just make it harder to be in a really, really terrible mindset.
I think it's a tool. Like, it's
absolutely
it's something that can put you in a better position to think that you can represent yourself accurately, even if it's not. You could take a total placebo, and I think it might have some effect too. But I'm not. I haven't.
I'm not willing to take that chance.
Well, I mean, it's hard to do that to yourself because how are you going to give yourself a
right.
placebo when you don't? Somebody else would have to do that for you. And how would they do that without you saying, "Oh, could you give me a placebo?" And then then you're always going to be guessing.
So, Zach, you have mentioned before that you feel anxiety in the leading up to a performance. Would you say that's accurate?
Oh my goodness.
Would you say that it's
very...
Oh yeah, please.
One very striking example was when we played Opus 131. That's a huge piece. And my emotional investment in Beethoven's works is very high. I spent so much time listening and creating like a psychological connection with it. And so that was the first time where I totally felt the pressure of that moment because I was super invested in a personal way. I don't know. Now that I'm actually listening to you guys, I'm realizing that a lot of my music making comes from a place of spontaneity, or my intrinsic sense of music making comes from a sense of what can I do in the moment? What are low risk, high reward things that I can do to make the music a much more bright, human, relatable, I don't know, a more magical thing, as opposed to really being grounded in, I guess, my practice, what I do all the time. Anyway, that's super tangential. But to answer your question, Sean, playing Opus 131, that was a lot of pressure for me. Now, it's so funny. Everybody who I think I probably have told every single one of you guys after performance that I really, really, really want to do it again. Yeah. I'm actually one of the only people I know who there's a basketball term, run it back, and it's basically okay, we got. I want to play again. Let's do it again. And that's exactly how I feel after a lot of performances. And I think if I'm thinking back objectively and trying to, rationalize it, I think it's because I do feel anxiety leading up to it. And the second time would probably be, if not as rewarding as the first performance, because I live for performing, love to do it. It would probably be even more enjoyable because I could be even more free and more simultaneously free and grounded as I'm performing with my friends.
Can I ask you what that means?
Which?
So I'm very curious. I've got so many questions for everybody now, but to keep it in focus. So I guess specifically, Zach, so when you're talking about being free in performance, what aspects are you talking about? For example, would you ever change a fingering you're doing in a performance? Would you ever change a bowing you're doing mid-performance?
100%. 100%. If I felt like it would... When I say free, I mean there's a direct connection between how I'm singing the music in my brain and how I'm executing with my hands and arms. And there are some shifts that facilitate a kind of a vocal gesture. It's just being free to, at a moment's notice, sing one note a little bit differently than you would normally to just bring out a certain element of a phrase. It's like when light hits a glistening object, you don't anticipate how it's going to glisten off of that object, but it's still so beautiful in that moment.
So is that a high risk or a low risk thing to do in your assessment? Because you were talking about low risk and high reward. So, where is it on the spectrum?
Well, that's all contingent upon the gesture. If I am feeling super gutsy and want to like make a real kind of thing and like just play everything on the G string for a certain type of tone and feel and mood, that could be a pretty high risk, high reward. But if it's like if it's like a beautiful little gesture that I can make with my bow, it's like a contact point adjustment. That's a very small risk, but a very high reward situation depending on the line that I'm trying to create.
Right. So under what circumstances would you say, "Oh, I feel comfortable to try to play this all on the G string"?
And that is so ridiculous because it really, instead of it being 100% go to, let's make this a high risk, high reward situation every time, it really has to do more with how I'm feeling on the day. 100%. If I wake up and I feel like I don't know, like I could run with the wolves, like I've just got this intense like attitude of I mean, I hate to say dominance, but like there's just no stopping me in anything I do. Then I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna really go for the gesture.
So what I'm saying here is that the only difference is your mood. Like you've literally not practiced it anymore. It's not like you've had any more planning time to be like, I'm gonna anticipate doing this on the G string. It's just your mood that can change your likelihood of taking that risk in the moment. I just find that really interesting because it's like you're not any more prepared for it than you would have been on a day you felt bad. But the fact that you feel good about it is encouraging you to do these things.
But that also comes with like, the background of having experimented with those kind of gestures in an isolated situation. The tool is in my quiver, or like the arrow is in my quiver, the tool's in my tool set. Like I practice certain gestures because they feel like things that I want to incorporate. They are how I sing on the instrument. Mm-hmm. I think actually what comes to mind, we had a rehearsal for Verklärte, and there's a second violin all up the G string line, and it's absolutely, if I remember right, Sean, it's one of your favorites.
It is one of my favorites, definitely.
But I had the pleasure of doing it, and then I don't remember if it's a high E flat or something. What's that?
High D flat.
High D flat.
It's a high D flat.
The high D flat, and I just like the first time I rehearsed it with you guys, like I had practiced it, nice and clean a couple times, but like there were days when I was just like, you gotta just. Like you just get into that. No, you scoop into it. Well, not scoop, but you make a very vocal shift into the note. And in that moment, I felt amazing. And I remember just soaring up to the D flat and just like landing on it and putting a fat vibrato. Like it felt amazing, like how it should be sung. But then I do remember in certain practice scenarios where I biffed the D flat, like 100%. Anyway, in that moment, I felt amazing. And my own personal struggle has been being a performer in a medium where there's not immediate response from an audience. Like if I'm performing with you guys in a rehearsal or just with you guys in general, I get a response from you guys. It's musical. It's like a nonverbal communicative thing. So if I make that amazing shift, I'm going to get something from you guys. And I know oh yeah, we like this. But in terms of like performing for an audience, a lot of the time it's just like playing into a black hole. And so I just get no response. And that is something that I've been grappling with since I was like 18 or 19 years old. When I started playing, I was playing Rondo Capriccioso, and like that's a piece that was it's near and dear to my heart now. But when I was playing it for an audience, I felt naked almost. I felt like I wasn't being listened to. It's like if you're in a conversation and people just ignore you and then move on to it. And I was like, why do I feel this way? And then my teacher and I were just like, well, that's weird. And we like kind of went down the rabbit hole. Yeah, it was very strange.
There's something about external feedback that you find very necessary, it almost seems.
Yeah, for sure.
Why do you think that is?
Because
Or do you think that's a good thing?
Do I think it's a good thing?
Or is it neutral? It's just with the way you are.
I mean, it's who I am, and it has its pluses and minuses. It has its negatives and positives. I find that for a period of my life, over the last 10 years or so, I have found more of this freedom that I mentioned earlier, playing in a group, in a quartet, in an orchestra or whatever, because I feel like there is more potential response.
Mm.
But I've also, as an adult, developed a more mature sense of an audience appreciation. And so that actually has actually like helped me be more present in every single kind of performance. And now I'm actually really excited to try to like perform by myself. So I don't have to like, so I can kind of be more invested in that moment, knowing that people are not just like staring at me.
So how does this manifest in an audition, Zach, when you're behind a screen and can't see anyone in the room?
That is the question. So auditions were the worst, the absolute worst for that.
Do you feel that leading up to an audition, or is it like Daron and Alexa were saying, where you show up and it's like, oh my god,
No, I feel it leading
this is
up.
here, and I've never. You feel it leading up.
I feel it leading up because I know.
And how do you? What coping mechanisms have you developed for that?
Admittedly, I've only been really successful for one audition,
Mm-hmm.
and so I don't think I really honed down a foolproof way of dealing with it in that particular atmosphere. I mean, I say that because sometimes when I play Mozart 39 by myself, I swear I could be like in the Berlin Phil. Some days I feel like it's really, really good. And I mean, we all feel that way, right? Like there are moments when we play, like I heard you, Sean, play Don Juan the other day, and it was really like, oh my goodness. It was great playing. We have those moments when we're not in high pressure situations where it's like, damn. Actually, this is very interesting. Steve Balderson is a professor at DePaul University, and he did orchestra rep class, I think was the name of the class. And he talked a lot about how his approach was a little bit different than most. He said, do not go into an audition unless you know you're going to win it. And that was just like, what?
Impossible.
Because I've always been taught the opposite.
He's won a bunch of auditions too.
I've always been taught the opposite. Like, you're never going to feel comfortable. You're going to go in, and it's just a learning process, whatever. Now, after having been like in and out of that atmosphere for a while, I realized there is, I think, something to that. And I think you just don't want to get into a pattern of biffing, a pattern of perceived anxiety, or like a pattern of just being in a mental headspace where you feel like, oh, it's an insurmountable hurdle. I'm hitting a wall.
So you try to recognize when it becomes a pattern, or you try to catch it before it becomes a pattern, would you say?
I know the pattern is there. The last audition I took was for the San Antonio Symphony, I think in like 2018 or 2019. That was a pretty good representation of me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that...
Did you get any feedback?
No, I definitely did not.
Did you ask for feedback and they didn't give it, or what was the situation there?
It was the first audition I had done in like 2 years. And so it was more of me fighting my demons than it was me getting an objective sense of how I was playing. I probably should have asked for feedback, but I don't know if it really was about that, because I think I can hear it.
Yeah, I can relate with that. I don't know. Maybe it's a weakness for me as well, just like being afraid of what they're going to say. But I feel like leaving an audition that I know what I should have done differently or better, and it didn't happen in the moment. And so it's almost like I'm afraid to see them agree with me or something.
I think that's a bit of a trap too, because you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know. So if they say something,
and that's something that Darren made me think of this earlier when he was talking about making whole judgments on people, or thinking that they are while you're playing. I've had twice in the last year the opportunity to be on the panel for professional auditions for the first time in my life. It's still interesting sitting behind the screen, and even if I don't know that everyone behind the screen is always like this, I'm always conscious of, I want the person to do well, always. Mm-hmm. And it's generally very easy to look past small imperfections that seem really big when you're behind the screen by yourself. And I see that happen. I have seen that happen from the adjudicating side, the deciding side, the panel side. I can see when someone, or I can hear rather, because I can't see them, we're behind a screen, but I can hear when someone makes that little thing, and it's like, oh, that was a little thing. And then it starts to derail them. And all of a sudden, they're not really in the moment anymore. They're worried about the next time that thing's going to happen. Maybe it's, oh, I'm already been eliminated. I've made this mistake, and they've stopped listening now. Well, that's not necessarily the case. It's been valuable for me to put myself in the other shoes and to help myself imagine better intentions on the other side of the screen, I guess. It's very easy for me to kind of assume that everyone behind the screen is just like waiting for me to miss a note and then just, okay, we don't need them.
Right.
Or,
They have dinner plans, and they're like, next.
yeah, they have dinner
next,
plans. Or
next."
yeah, one time when I was auditioning for college, while I was playing, someone on the panel leaned over and whispered to someone else. For all I know, it could have been, do you want sandwiches or pizza for lunch? But in my mind, while I was playing, they were saying, can you believe this guy showing up today and sounding like this? Or I don't think that was actually necessarily what I was thinking. But it definitely was like, oh my God, what are they saying? What are they saying about me? And not necessarily even, it didn't even necessarily, it could have been good. People behind the screen could be thinking very positive things, but if you're behind a screen, you can imagine them thinking whatever you want.
I think that we are kind of discussing tangentially a very intense cultural issue, or maybe cultural isn't specific enough. We are conditioned to be analyzers as opposed to like big picture. Well, I guess it's really, never mind, maybe not, because doing what we do is really hard.
Yeah.
There are always things that we can improve on, and like being technically able is really what enables us to be musically able. I mean, that's what I guess makes music so difficult, is that the field that we're in is so incredibly difficult because you have to be able to go in and out, micro, macro, micro, macro. Anyway, at least that's my perspective.
There's a few points that have been brought up in my mind, and I want to make sure Daron gets to talk as well, because I feel like I've been talking a lot and it's maybe a little unbalanced. So
I'm sorry.
Zach and I have been going for a minute, so you guys can take the floor.
Zach needs to go to the bathroom.
I feel like such an because Alexa was about to go on like 3 points, but I'm about to burst.
Okay, take a break.
All right, now that Zach's gone, let's talk about him.
Daron, would you like to talk about your piece, and then you can insert it as appropriate?
Sure. The piece, or the excerpt that I'm playing today, comes from a collection of pieces by Aaron Minsky that he calls 10 American Etudes. And they're not etudes in the sense of Schrodiak or Popper or any of the kind of the big boys of technical instrumental playing, but he uses them as studies in some small technique combined with some influence from a genre of popular American music. And across the set, there is Southern rock, and there is musical theater, and there is jazz. And this etude is called Laid Back Devil. He calls it Laid Back Devil because the music itself has this very simple, kind of charming, attractive quality to it, but it's very, very difficult because you're having to move your hand around for all of these different combinations of double stops that fit within, the same chord. It's D major in 4 or 5 different positions. And so really making it sound as easy as it should is very, very difficult. And it takes a lot of mental awareness of everything that's going on to try and navigate these technical challenges at the same time that you're kind of conveying this very carefree, oh, whatever, we're just kind of chilling on the porch and this is what's playing on the radio kind of vibe.
I'm in the process of trying to learn how to play in tune on a new instrument right now. And a large part of it has just been in the mornings picking it up and playing scales and arpeggios and double stops and just being like, okay, how do I find my way around this fingerboard now?
Can I just put a button on that? Is there such thing as perfect intonation? I think the answer is no. The answer resoundingly is no, because everybody has it's all within a range, right? There's no anyway, we'll talk about that another time.
So Alexa, you were on a roll.
Yes. Yes, I was.
I'm sorry, Alexa, I'm interrupting you left and right.
No. I mean, I there's a lot to say on that too. I mean, with a new instrument, with intonation in general, I think a lot of it is just about trust and the integrity of expression and intention and whatever. But maybe we'll come back to that. What I was going to say in relation to the points that Sean and Zach had brought up, and a little bit about maybe more of the approach that I would give students that addresses in the moment anxiety that I actually do use, and maybe just didn't perceive that as such when I said I don't actually do that earlier in this episode. So Zach was talking about the audience appreciation aspect of performance, and it struck me that maybe, the reason you were talking about struggling with auditions, you pretty much get zero. There's not even an audience that you can see or perceive in the room, and that they're judging. It's not all positive. They're not just there to enjoy it. They have to make a decision and use some negative information to make that decision, whether they're intending to or not. That's just kind of how it goes. Obviously they're trying to find the most positive person to join their group or whatever, but inevitably some negativity slips in there to help guide that, be the foil to the positive information. But the way that I like to think about countering that is not needing an audience to perform. So I guess it's kind of like the whole, popular phrases, dance like nobody's watching and sing like nobody's listening. And it sounds like for you, Zach, that would be very unsatisfying and not actually something that would bring positivity to your singing and dancing experience.
I very rarely dance by myself or sing by myself.
And I think part of the point of those things is to say, oh, you don't have to be inhibited or whatever. And that's a little bit different than feeling the satisfaction of sharing with an audience. And I acknowledge that. But I think part of what we do as artists should be having a story to tell, whether or not someone's there to hear it, and crafting the telling of that story. And the telling of the story and the intentions and the emotions and the art that's in it and behind it needs to be stronger than the anxiety that shows up when we're standing up to tell it, whether we're in a room by ourselves or in a room with a lot of people who are there to receive our story. I think what we practice is crafting what we put into it, all the expression in the music, all the intentions in the music, and then we have to make that the focus no matter where we are and what the situation is. So if I'm in an audition playing Don Juan, I want to convey the story of Don Juan in my excerpt, whether or not I'm being judged or not, whether I'm in a practice room, whether I'm performing it in a recital, which would not happen unless I arrange it for violin, piano, or something crazy, which maybe is a great idea. Maybe I should do that. Make a concerto full of excerpts.
That might be amazing.
But, that's an idea for another day maybe. But it's just helpful to tell the story and focus on that and acknowledge, yes, the anxiety is there, but also I have something bigger than that to give here and to share here. And so you can come along for the ride, anxiety, and you can maybe add an air of excitement to this telling of the story, because it does heighten the senses and kind of put you into, they call the fight or flight mode or whatever. And I think that can actually make the telling of your story even more dynamic. And I think audience members can perceive it, and I think it can be perceived in a positive way. We've all been there watching somebody nervous and responding to it in a not positive way, and you see it and your heart goes out to them because this is not a true representation of what they wanted. And I try to at least set up my students to be able to flip it a little bit and say, okay, you know what? That can happen, and that's not the end of the world either, but also I can focus on what I am trying to express here. If I have that thing to focus on, then there's something that this can be channeled towards in a positive way. So hopefully that made some sort of sense.
Yeah, I like that very much. I like your emphasis that you have enough space for both. You have enough space for the anxiety, but you also have enough space for the excitement and for the energy and for the message. And you can train yourself to develop it to the extent that it can overpower, or it can be stronger, or at least still be there.
I think I just got a little jaded over time, because I think that definitely was my prevailing music making perspective into my early to mid 20s. But I guess when you're out of school and you got to make money, you got to survive. I probably just lost it. That's the gospel, Alexa. That's it.
I think that might be a good time for Zach to introduce his piece as he's walking away. Where are you going, Zach?
I forgot to check the charged headphones. I got to do a little switcheroo, but I'll be quick. I composed it on July 3rd of 2020. maybe July 2nd, whatever the Friday was before July 4th. And I'm a part of an art school. During the break, I kind of like doubled down on things that, brought me some kind of fulfillment. Sports is one thing and art was another one. So I'm trying to get better as an artist, visual artist, drawing and things. I'm a part of this art class, and it focuses around anti-racism. And for this particular class, we listened to Frederick Douglass's "What to a Slave is the 4th of July." After listening to this particular speech that was recited by Frederick Douglass's ancestors, we as a group were supposed to draw a bust of Frederick Douglass, but I found that I could not draw. I was very, very compelled. I started hearing patriotic songs in my brain in an extremely contorted and distorted way. It was my emotional, intellectual processing of who I think I am as an American and how that has changed as a result of the George Floyd murder. My piece that I composed was this incredible moment of processing who I thought I was, who I thought my country was, and basically trying to reconcile this incredible pain with hope for the future. The song is "Today I Mourn." I'm so glad we had the discussion about the narrative quality of music, because whenever I perform Today I Mourn, I never, ever, ever am nervous because I'm so invested in the narrative. I'm so connected to this feeling of pain and loss and hope that it kind of just, it takes away any of the negative elements that I would perceive in, I don't know, like if I were auditioning with a Don Juan or a Mozart or something. It's just such a much more real experience for me. And I don't have to really think about how other people are perceiving it. It's because I'm so in that narrative. I'm so really, really passionate about telling this story, this moment. I will never forget that moment in my life. I'll never forget that moment as I was sitting, supposed to be working on the bust of Frederick Douglass, but all I could hear was music.
Thank you. Thank you, Zach. I'd like to talk about fixed versus progress-oriented belief systems in our practicing and whether they're conscious or unconscious, and maybe start by just saying what that means. Daron, I know this is something that you and I have talked about a few times. Would you maybe give us your definitions or how these ideas work for you as a teacher and a performer and a practicer? And
the idea is that whoever you are today and the things that you can do today, you couldn't always do those things. You had to learn to do them. You had to learn to walk. You had to learn to talk. You had to learn to eat. Everything that you do, you learned to do it. But you don't think sometimes about these things that you can do as things that you at one point could not do because you have done them so long and so naturally that they just feel like they've always been a part of you. And that can sometimes lead to the idea that you are also fixed and rigid in that you have always done all of the things that you can do, and you cannot do anything, or you will never be able to do something that you cannot do right now. But the reality is you had to learn to do all of those things, and you can learn to do other things. It's about understanding that the feeling of knowing how to do something comes from having not known how to do it a lot and having tried to do it a lot. And with some of my students, like, we'll talk about the specifics of how your brain cells respond to stimulus and myelination and how your brain will actually change in the process of trying to do new tasks. But the fact of the matter is, like, our brains are very plastic. They're very adaptable to change. And it's just responding to stimulus. That if you expose your brain to a certain action or a certain idea over and over again, it will absorb that thing in such a way that it begins to feel very, very natural for you. And practicing with a process or a growth-oriented approach is keeping in mind that what you're doing right now is making it easier for you to do this thing tomorrow. It doesn't mean that you will master it today, that you will develop some spidey sense about it today, but that you are giving yourself a better platform for the next time that you try to understand what's going on.
I think, Alexa, you intuited this very nicely last conversation when you simply said, I might not be able to do this today, but that doesn't necessarily mean I won't be able to do it tomorrow. It's just an recognition that not being able to do something does not mean that this is always going to be the case. I find myself falling into this loop a lot without realizing it, particularly with orchestra excerpts that I've been working on for years, and I fall into, traps of, I used to be able to play it better than I can now, when in fact I just can't play it as well because I've only been practicing it for 30 minutes, versus 3 months when I first learned it. Or I've never been able to play this excerpt the way I want it to after however many years of working on it. What makes me think that I'll be able to ever?
Or you have a bad performance of it one time in studio class, and so you begin to immediately associate that's always how that part will feel, and that's always
that's how I play this thing. Yeah. The first time I played Schumann's Scherzo was terrible, therefore I can't play it. I don't know how to, my instrument can't do the stroke, or it seems like it is a very simple concept but
it's not an easy one.
It's not an easy one, and it's a very easy one for myself to fall into, and I see it with my students very often. Negativity can kind of spiral around this idea, where it's just kind of like, I can't do this.
That's really interesting.
And, I'm just going to accept it, I guess.
I mean, what you were describing, the things like learning how to walk and learning how to eat and things like that. There's always new awakenings in those activities too. Like, I guess I find it difficult to think about. I know there's aspects of my life that I do it, but I'm not conscious of them, so I can't bring it out. But like being fixed in a state, like I'm not somebody who thinks like that a lot. And I think it's because I've had so many, sometimes embarrassing experiences where it's like, wow, I don't actually know how to eat. Like in my undergraduate degree, I had edamame for the first time. And the first time I tried to eat the pod because I was how do you eat this, And so I remember that because it's like, wow, I was in college. You think I'd know how to eat food by now. Evidently not. And then there are things like table manners and other methods of eating, it's just educating yourself all the time. Oh, Thai food, you don't eat with chopsticks after all. Oh, interesting. I thought I knew something and I don't. And I guess I'm most aware that anything that I think I know could be wrong, and that's okay. And I'm not mad about it. So that, also applies to anything I think I can do or can't do. It could be wrong, and that's okay.
Sure.
Or it could be different today versus tomorrow. And
yeah, and I think
so far I'm doing okay. And
I think you're very right that this exists to varying degrees in people, and it sounds like it's not something that you necessarily have to deal with, and that's great.
Yeah, I think I'm very lucky actually to have been encouraged, maybe in the right ways at a young enough age that it's not become a rooted
okay to fail.
Well, that's interesting actually, because I would say as far as music goes, it was not okay to fail because my father was my teacher, and it would, make the whole family look bad if I was not doing so well. But somehow I've overcome it, and now I play the viola instead of the violin, so I can't be judged on the same plane. And I sidestepped that one.
We're going to do a quiz at the end of all these episodes. What instrument does Alexa play? Can anybody remember? She's definitely never mentioned it.
Oh, it's funny. I actually just did some cello practice this weekend because I have to be better than my students in high school, or at least I have to know how to help them. Is this a second finger, or, I want to know a little bit more than I know now. So,
Especially if you're the only orchestra teacher.
yes, you might see some hilarious clips floating around the internet of my progress or lack thereof. My viola bow hold on the cello.
Oh, there you go.
I look forward to it.
Will I make it as far as I did on the viola? No.
100 days of practice on cello. That's great, though. I mean, this is an excellent segue, I think, into what I'd like to maybe wrap things up with, which is how does this mindful practice in music relate to new hobbies or old hobbies or any aspects of your life? And we don't need to get you can go as personal as you want to or not. It's perfectly fine.
It's so interesting. I played tennis last night, and I played like dog expletive. It was so bad. And I think it was because the whole time I was thinking about my grip. I did research about the different types of grips. There's like the Eastern grip, semi-Western grip, continental grip, the Western grip.
Micro.
Yeah, right?
Micro.
Super micro. And that's my big thing. Like when I get too micro, I start effing up. And so it was so interesting because about 2/3 of the way through, I had one of those moments where you're like, Zach, what are you doing? And like the thing was, I was like so assured in my, how do I say, am I like, oh, but you're doing such a great job analyzing how you're playing. But you are playing so poorly. So then I really had to I had to close my eyes really hard and like shut down a part of myself that was analyzing everything and just try to push myself to just play and react. And so that, I was a little bit better, but it was a huge accomplishment in that I shut down, or at least, I don't know about subconsciously, but I consciously shut down that part of myself that was analyzing my grip. Anyway, mindfulness in the way of being mindful of when I go micro. Yeah, that's a big thing. And I do that not only with tennis, but with art. Last month we worked on perspective. There's 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective. And I chose to not use a ruler, which is apparently more difficult, but I didn't really think anything of it because I was just connecting, from point A to point B and creating angles. And it turned out pretty okay. A lot of it looks really nice. But there was one drawing though that I was just too micro. I was too deep in the minutia and I was like, oh my gosh, stop.
Yeah, I would say that kind of analyzing has its place, but
yes,
like anything, it can kind of take over, right? And you forget to actually.
And Zach, for you to some degree, these are both new pursuits, right? You're relatively new at both of these things. And there's this model of learning that I really like where you kind of go through, there's 4 stages when you're going through mastery. You start out with unconscious incompetence, where you don't know what you don't know. And then you have conscious incompetence, where you know what you don't know, and you realize that the thing you're learning is much deeper and much bigger than you thought. And you kind of retreat and you're like, oh man, there's so much more. And I have to learn all of these little things to be able to get good at it. And then you work on those. And then you move into conscious competence, where you know what you know. And that's where I think a lot of people and a lot of things end up. And that's where you can kind of do it and enjoy it and you're aware of what's going on. And then you move into unconscious competence, where you're like, I don't even know how to do this anymore. I'm just good at it. Be better if you want to be like me. I don't know what to tell you.
I wonder if you can skip past or.
And I don't think that you can. I think that's part of the problem. And it sounds to me like you're kind of entering this conscious incompetence phase with some of your things, where you're recognizing that there's more to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that it requires some attention to it, but also that you also know from being a musician that ultimately you're going to have to let that go.
So Daron, do you think the child prodigies went through the stage of conscious incompetence?
Yes, but they may not have been made to be self-conscious about it.
So you think they went through oh, I know all this stuff that I can't do and I'm going to work on doing it. There's no such thing as a natural.
Well, in the sense that their teacher's okay, now do this, and then they try to do it and they're like, oh, I can't do that. But that's, maybe that's as far as it goes as a young child. You don't have more baggage attached to it, but that you have some.
Maybe there is no I can't do that. It's just I'm doing this and then I'm going to keep doing it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. But like, if you miss the step of I can't do it, and you just go towards, oh, what do I need to do that? Are you in that stage where you're knowing what you don't know, or are you just kind of bypassing it into the I don't care that I don't know it. I'm just gonna work till I do it kind of
I don't
thing.
know that like your emotional recognition of your stage really plays into it too much. There's areas of gray here, right? You can be more consciously competent at some aspects of the thing that you're doing as opposed to more consciously incompetent at other aspects of it.
I'm sure it's a nuanced relationship, and the stages can look differently for different people in different times of their lives.
It's not like you don't like graduate to your red belt conscious competence. It happens very gradually over weeks or months or years, as the case may be.
I think that Alexa's onto something though, that with some maybe the key to teaching and learning is kind of jumping over that chasm of the knowing, the can't chasm. Ooh, that's the name of my next book.
Well, the
guys.
other thing, what was the last category? What's the category for?
Unconscious competence.
I don't think that exists either, or I think that is not a final destination either. I think that's still stage 3, but you've reached the stage where people who are not at stage 4 will not be able to see that necessarily.
When I think about that, I think about my teacher in grad school. And maybe this is a bigger discussion of the fact that like teaching somebody to do a thing is different than actually doing the thing itself. And maybe my teacher, maybe we didn't connect well on him trying to explain to me how to do things. But we had so many lessons where the only advice he could give me was more fingers or less fingers. And I was like, well, what does that mean? It's just it's got too much fingers.
He was teaching you mindful practice, you just didn't know it.
Right, but like for him to not feel like he could really describe how to do it differently or to give more insight into it, to me was this sense of like, you just do it this way and that's how you do it. Go figure out what that means.
I think there are different ways of setting that up though. I don't think that's a universal stage.
What I think is interesting is the unconscious competence. I think there are plenty of people who stumble through life being incredibly competent without thinking about it. Because everybody has aptitudes.
At what?
I think that there are a lot of naturally born athletes. There are a lot of people who are born with incredible hearing. There are a lot of people who are born with aptitudes. And then that enables them to do something naturally. Let's say, like, I don't know, I'm sure you guys know, or I guess you guys in your friend group, you've got one particular friend who really, really is a great cook. Or one friend who's like, they can pick up any instrument. Not to say that that's everybody and representative of everyone, but there are cases of extreme aptitude. And what's interesting is the unconscious element. If your brain is going and you're thinking about doing something, I think that's really what qualifies it. So is it an unconscious element? I would say no. There's always like a part of you that is focusing on what you're trying to accomplish and achieve, but it's the perception of fluidity of the motion or fluidity of the action that gives the observer the perception of subconscious competence.
Daron or Alexa?
Well, I'll try to keep it brief, but I guess what I would like to leave as my concluding point, unless anybody brings up something I disagree with again and I have to go off. Overall, life confidence is going to translate a lot into your musical life confidence and your presentation. And I think you can always benefit from learning new things, exploring your boundaries as a person in other aspects of your own life, and becoming more confident with who you are and what you stand for and what you feel like representing or communicating in any way that you do it. And I think that's a way to expand and become more comfortable in your musical presence as well.
I'm going to sound like a chump after that. I think about this in two contexts, in the context of cooking and in the context of playing pool, where with cooking, when you kind of start to be a new cook, you follow recipes to the letter. I need 1 teaspoon of this and I need a half a cup of this. And the more that you cook, the more that you develop this sense that recipes are kind of a framework themselves, or they're following some sort of formula that already exists. And there's a lot of space within that to adapt to your own personal tastes, or to recognize where the person who wrote this recipe may have been in some different circumstance. Their oven runs cooler, or their black pepper was stale, and so they put in a whole lot of it to try and compensate, or they really like some particular flavor. It becomes a way that you can express yourself, but there's not like the edges of what is right and wrong are a little bit gooier than they are with music, because like as long as the chicken is hot enough, like you're not going to kill somebody.
Hopefully not too gooey.
Yeah, right, not too gooey. But that there's a sense that when you are, I don't even like to say it this way, but when you're cooking in like the purest sense, when it's just you in the food, that it's about looking at your ingredients and seeing what they're doing moment to moment and making decisions about how is this moving towards what I have in mind for the final dish, and being able to adjust what's going on in that moment to moment circumstance, which is a lot like performance, right? If you need to recognize that like, oh, we're all getting a little excited and the tempo's going up, let's calm it down, is the same as like I turned my pan up too hot and these onions are going to burn if I don't take them off or I don't turn the pan down or something like that. And so for me, there's a lot of overlap with these things in the sense that the more that you just pay attention and the more that you look and the more that you let what's going on really dictate your actions, and the less that you have to feel like you have to really control and manhandle the situation, in a lot of ways, the easier it is to get the thing that you want. That there is a sense of giving, I don't even say giving up control, but it really is that, in a sense, that you're not trying to dictate the result so much as you are accepting that part of the process is feedback, input, output, what's happening, how do I respond to that? And that's on stage, that's in the practice room, that's everywhere.
Thank you, everyone. I guess I'll just close by saying that for myself, mindful practice, both inside the practice room and eventually in other categories, while I do cook a lot, I'm afraid I haven't intuited the process to the same degree as Daron. I'm definitely a recipe follower, at least the first time I make a dish. But with, at various points, weightlifting and running and chess and just a mindful, like a more formalized mindful practice. Well, I guess I could point to two things. One is just an orientation in the loving of the process for the process's intrinsic sake. In the process itself of pursuing to be better one day after the next is a very life affirming and soul orienting way to live, I think. And I think that I found that largely through recognizing that something was very off for me through my playing. Like Alexa was saying, if your life is more or less aligned or unified, or your mind is less fractured, your playing, or in my experience, my playing will demonstrate that or resemble that. Versus if I'm being overwhelmed by anxiety or self-judgment or fear of whatever the case may be, it's going to result in a lot of negativity in and outside of the practice room. So it almost became like this, practicing sort of became my canary, I guess. It's like my signal that it's time to, or my signal that there's something that I need to be paying attention to. And it manifested itself in, eventually I can play in this restaurant with people around and we're just sight reading and things go great when I'm not thinking about it. I practiced for weeks for this audition and it goes terribly. What is going on here? It's obviously not my fingers on the fingerboard, my bow on the string. My body should know how to do this. There's something else at play. I think that is definitely one big aspect of it. I think I'll just leave it there. Mindful practice in and outside of the practice room, just an orientation in the joy of the process by itself. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with you all, and I know I have benefited a lot from it. I hope that some of you listening and have as well. And until next time.